What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction. In this we have how the Dutch changed the English language. Before we dive into the video, you guys happen to enjoy, please don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and let's see what the Dutch did to switch up the English language.
Did you know that about 1% of English words come from Dutch? Yes, that's much less than French or Latin or Old Norse or Anglo-Saxon, as you can see from this graph. But before you dismiss that as insignificant, wait until you hear which words they gave us and how they've shaken up the English language to a much greater degree than you might think. By the way, check out this video if you want to know how I arrived at these stats and what happened to Greek. Today on Let Them Talk TV, we're going to look at the fascinating story of how the Dutch language has influenced English. And if you're learning English, I'll show you words and expressions of Dutch origin that will spice up your English. Actually, I didn't want to say spice up. I wanted to use a Dutch word. The closest I could think of is pickle, which comes from Middle Dutch, peckle, so I could say it'll...
Peckle. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Check on my car. Apologies.
Pickle up your English, and if you're ready and you're feeling lucky, then let's go. Let's start with some vocabulary. Some words came into English directly from Dutch or Flemish, which is a dialect of Dutch, while others can be traced back to other languages but came to us via Dutch, mainly as a result of their importance as a trading power in the 15th to the 18th centuries. So, for example, what are you doing now? Apart from watching this video, of course. You might be drinking...
Reacting?
Coffee. When you order your cup of coffee, you're speaking the Dutch version of a word, coffee. And the Dutch got it from Arabic, kawa, got it from Turkish, kahve. Dutch traders spread and promoted the drinking of coffee in the mid-17th century. Really? And if you're not drinking coffee, then perhaps you're sipping a cup of tea. Yep, we get that from Dutch too. And they got it from the Min dialect of Chinese spoken in Fujian province. In the second half of the 16th century, England did not have any direct trade with China, but the Dutch did. We use their rendition of the Min word, and most of Europe takes the word tea from the Dutch. The other traders of tea were the Portuguese. They gave us the word cha, which is the Mandarin Chinese word for tea. Tea in Portuguese is chá. Chá was the first word used for tea in English until the Dutch came along, and it's still a synonym for tea today. Fancy a cup of chá? And what are you eating with your tea or coffee? Perhaps a cookie or two. A cookie. This comes from the Dutch.
Koekje.
Which means a little cake. And if not a cookie, maybe a scone. There you are, a scone, which is another Dutch word, which was originally schoenbrood, or fine bread, and the English took this word via the Scots.
And the Dutch doing the dang thing. I guess they taking words from other places and they spreading them across Europe. They spread, and then the U.S. came about, and the word spread across the U.S. because the U.K. settlers moved over to the U.S. and started America, and we all know how that went down. But yeah, so we got coffee, tea, cookie, all Dutch. You say thank you to the Dutch when you drinking that coffee, when you drinking that tea, when you eating that cookie, when you eating that scone. You thank the Dutch for the words.
And did I just spend half the morning traipsing across Paris just to find a scone to show you in this video for 3 seconds? Well, I won't answer that. Anyway, if you're having something to eat, but not a full meal, Perhaps a snack. That's another Dutch word, snack, and it comes from the Middle Dutch, snacken, to snatch or to snap or to chatter. And if you're watching this video in the evening, you might be drinking something stronger than tea or coffee. Perhaps you're drinking alcohol. Well, no, alcohol is from Arabic, but the informal term for an alcoholic drink in English is booze, as I'm sure you know.
Yes.
And booze is from the Middle Dutch slang word bussen,
to drink,
which meant to drink to excess.
Yeah.
I must have some booze. I demand to have some booze.
I had plenty of booze in my college days. Probably enough for the rest of my life, I think.
And perhaps some of you out there have a passion for technology or computers, or maybe you work in IT. If you do, I might say that you are a geek. In Dutch, gek means a fool, but don't let that worry, because I'm a bit of a geek myself. How did this all come about? We're going to look at the history of Dutch migration and trade, as well as the rivalry, often bloody rivalry, between England and the Netherlands.
Oh.
You won't want to miss this.
I don't.
But first, a word from our sponsors, NordVPN.
Skip the sponsor.
Now, this is the first time I've ever done a sponsored video description. We'll start our tale at the end of Roman rule in Britain in 410 AD. In this period, a number of tribes from northern Europe migrated to Britain, and these included the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. The language that evolved from these tribes I shall refer to as Anglo-Saxon or Old English, and these terms are interchangeable. There would have been trade between the Anglo-Saxons and those on the other side of the Channel in what is now the Netherlands, Belgium, and the northwestern tip of Normandy. Between the 5th and the 12th centuries, the language they spoke there is known today as Old Dutch. Just a side note, Old Dutch is a language that evolved from Frankish, which is where France gets its name from. And the French language got a lot of its vocabulary from Frankish.
That makes sense.
But that's a subject for another day. Now, along the coast was another tribe, the Frisians, who spoke Frisian, which is considered to be the closest language to English. But we'll talk about that another day too. Today, let's focus on Dutch. So, Old Dutch and Anglo-Saxon shared a common ancestor, and during this early medieval period, these languages would have been mutually comprehensible to some extent, but how much so is difficult to say, as only fragments of documents and texts written in Old Dutch have survived. But what is clear is that over time, the languages drifted apart.
Okay.
And if you're wondering how English fits in with the other languages, have a look at this graph. Most linguists consider English to be a West Germanic language, but there is a minority opinion which considers it to be a North Germanic language, along with the likes of Icelandic, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish. For more on that,
so which would you guys say English? West, North? I'm not sure about history. I'm not sure about where languages came from. I don't know. So that's why I'm asking for you guys. What would y'all say? West Germanic or North Germanic? Talk to me.
Check out my brilliant video on how the Vikings changed the English language. Every schoolboy and schoolgirl in Britain learns that the last invasion of England happened in 1066 at the Battle of Hastings, when William the Conqueror of Normandy defeated the English King Harold. Now, that might not be quite right. There might have been a more recent invasion. We'll look at that in a moment. But did you know that William's army was not only Norman? About 1/3 of the invading Norman army of 1066 came from Dutch-speaking Flanders, some of whom were rewarded with endowments of land in England. A word about terminology here. Flemings are the people from Flanders. The definition of a Fleming today is a little different from that of the Middle Ages. At the time, a Fleming was anyone from not only modern-day Flanders, but also many Dutch speakers of what is today the Netherlands. The connection between the Low Countries and Britain goes back a long way, and many migrants and refugees came over to Britain from the Low Countries. Just to give you an example of the numbers, in 1527 there were tens of thousands of Flemings in London, many in the weaving and textile industry, and it is estimated that about 1/3 of Scots have a Flemish background, and explains why so many Scottish people or people of Scottish descent have the surname Fleming. For example, Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond novels, whose father was Scottish, and Sir Alexander Fleming, the Scottish doctor who discovered penicillin. Throughout the Middle Ages, there was not only migration from Flemish and Dutch lands, but also a large share of English trade in the 13th century was in the hands of Flemish merchants. So we see quite a number of Dutch words relating to commerce entering the English language at that time. The word trade itself is of Dutch origin, and it meant the track of a ship. Other words include pack and bundle from Middle Dutch, and bundle meant a collection of things tied together. The word deel may have been of Middle Dutch or Frisian origin and meant to divide up. And wagon is also of Middle Dutch, meaning a vehicle to carry goods. On your wagon, you might...
How much words did we get from the Dutch? I feel like the Dutch have done their fair share of contributing to the English language. So I'm intrigued. How much words exactly did we get?
Dutch word. And kit comes from Middle Dutch, kitter, and originally meant a wooden container. Dock comes from Middle Dutch, dokke. The Flemish were important players in the beer industry, as they still are today. And many Flemings set up breweries in the south of England during the 14th century. And the techniques they used were different from the English brewers. The Flemish used hops, whereas the English were using malt to make ale. The word brewery itself comes from Dutch
brouwerij,
and the word hop comes from Dutch hoppe. The Dutch were an important seafaring power, and from there we get a few nautical terms relating to ships, such as skipper, deck, dock, and to cruise.
It makes sense that they would come from the Dutch.
A nautical term, and the word freight, which means to carry goods by water. During the 16th and 17th century.
It does make sense all those words came from the Dutch, since like the Dutch were, I call the Dutch the water bending tribe, because I feel like they bend the water at their will, and they have conquered the water, and they've conquered it for centuries and generations, and so I call them the water bending tribe, but it makes sense that they would have all these words associated with like being on a ship or associated with the water.
Dutch schools of painting influenced the art world, and from there we get the terms masterpiece from the Dutch,
meesterstuk,
easel and sketch, and still life, landscape from the Dutch,
landschap,
and etch. Do come up and see my etching sometime. They are not famous for their cuisine, perhaps, but we get quite a few words about food from the Dutch. We've already mentioned cookie and scone and pickle. We also get waffle and coleslaw and offal, which comes from Middle Dutch, offal, and means waste parts, if you're into that kind of thing. Through this close trading relationship and immigration, English acquired a great deal of new vocabulary. And in addition, the Dutch, as a global trading power through the Dutch East India Company, brought us new vocabulary from far-flung places. We already mentioned tea and coffee. Yes. And there was also bamboo and batik, amongst others.
England and
but there was conflict. There were 4 bloody wars between England and the Netherlands between the 1650s and the 1780s. Dang. Yes, that's right. The Dutch were our colonial.
They kept saying, run that back. I guess no matter who lost it, these two countries kept saying, run it back. Run it back. Let a couple years, let us recover, let's recuperate. Now run it back.
Rivals and our enemy for more than 100 years. And this could explain why there are so many expressions in English referring to the Dutch, most of which are negative. We're going to look at the expressions in a second, but a word about the war. Did you know between the 19th and 24th of June 1667, during the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the Dutch Navy sailed up the Thames estuary into the River Medway, where they destroyed the English fleet and captured the town of Sheerness. It was the worst defeat in English naval history at that time, and that was the last time England was technically invaded. So there was a lot of enmity between the two nations, and here are a few English expressions about the dastardly Dutch. I'll indicate which are everyday expressions to this day and which are less commonly used these days. Double Dutch. This is another term for gibberish. Someone who's speaking your own language, but the way they are speaking it makes no sense at all. So for example, I went to the website of the tax office to find out how to get a tax rebate, but the instructions make no sense at all. I just don't understand it. It's just double gibberish. Dutch. Dutch courage. This is courage you get from drinking alcohol.
Ain't nothing better than Dutch courage. I'll tell you that right now. There's nothing greater than Dutch courage. It has helped me out in many situations. So, shout out to Dutch courage. I love it.
It's negative because it's a fake courage.
That's
One
okay.
comes from a bottle, not from within.
That's okay.
So, for example,
that's okay.
I'm a very shy person, so before I give a speech to the members, I need a little Dutch courage. You know?
That's how I went to the parties in college. I'm a very shy person. I'm not too social. So before we go in here, let me get some of this Dutch courage to loosen my tongue and make me a little bit more social.
What I mean, to go Dutch. This means that each person pays their share of the bill.
I've never had this
in dating situations.
I've never went Dutch.
When the woman pays her share of the bill instead of being invited by the guy. That was a delightful meal, but the bill is quite expensive, isn't it? Shall we go Dutch? Oh yes, okay.
Let's do it.
Related to this is Dutch treat, where you're invited for a meal, but you're expected to pay your share of the bill.
I like these Dutch terms.
Treat at all. Dutch comfort.
I like these.
That's when something bad happens and then someone tells you that it could have been worse. You're so lucky you only broke your leg in the car crash. I mean, you could have got killed.
Yeah, true.
Well, thank you for your piece of Dutch comfort. A Dutch uncle is somebody who criticizes and offers harsh advice
that makes sense.
All the time.
Since the Dutch are such a direct people, hey, and they not out to spare your feelings. They out to give you the truth, point blank. Period. So, Dutch uncle,
the opposite of what you'd expect from a normal uncle. Look at you, what a mess. Cut your hair and smarten up, and don't drink so much coffee, and stop wasting your time on YouTube. A Dutch auction. This is the sort of an auction in reverse. The price starts high and goes down until somebody accepts the price.
That's pretty cool.
Dutch gold.
I like that.
This looks like gold, but in fact it's a cheap metal alloy with a similar appearance.
Oh, that's tough.
And a Dutch widow
A
is
prostitute.
a prostitute.
Okay.
Now our journey of Dutch influence takes us across the Atlantic to the United States. I'm sure you know that New York was once a Dutch colony and was known as New Amsterdam. If you go to New York today, you'll find Harlem, named after the Dutch town of Harlem, and Brooklyn, named after the Dutch village of Breukelen. Also, dollar comes to us from Dutch via the Scots language, and if you call an American a Yankee, it might be a corruption of the Dutch name Jan Kees, although this is disputed.
Okay.
There is still some interesting vocabulary that we still haven't covered yet, and if you're learning English, here are some great words of Dutch origin to use in your conversation or your writing. Let's start with hanker, which means to have a strong desire for something.
Hanker. It's a hanker.
Oh, I'm hankering for some cookies and coleslaw. Dapper, which means very smart in appearance.
Use that one a lot.
And it's usually said about a man.
Yes.
Rude,
Looking
you look
very
so
dapper.
in your Armani suit and
Crocs. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Frolic, which means to play around and have fun. And
I feel like I've definitely heard of almost all of these words that he's mentioning, but I would have never known they came from the Dutch. That's definitely news to me. Shout out to the Dutch.
It's from
Vrolijk.
which means cheerful in Dutch. We frolicked on the beach at Zeebrugge for many hours. Loiter. This means to hang around in a place without any purpose. You'll see no loitering signs all over Britain. Oi, there's no loitering outside my windmill. Go back home, guys. Poppycock. This is a synonym for nonsense. It sounds so British, but in fact, it was first used in America, and they took it from the Dutch.
Poppenkak.
What did you say? Amsterdam doesn't have any bicycle lanes? What poppycock. Snoop. To snoop means to spy on someone or to secretly look for information about them. Saskia, why are you snooping around my yacht? Go back on deck immediately. Spooky.
Oh.
Spooky
All of these are from the Dutch?
And ghostly that makes you afraid. Let me tell you, walking through the old graveyard in Utrecht at 4 a.m. was a bit spooky. Wiggle. This means small, rapid movements. The expression wiggle room means a little bit of space or freedom to change the decision. We'll set the price for the tulip bulbs very high. This will give us a little wiggle room if we wish to reduce it later. What could possibly go wrong? Quack. A quack is an unqualified person who practices medicine. You might also refer to your actual doctor as a quack, but only in a humorous way. It comes from
Kwakzalver.
meaning someone who applies ointments. So he told me that the best way to avoid getting COVID was to eat lots of Edam cheese and to watch the films of Audrey Hepburn. Sounds like a quack to me.
Absolutely.
Finally,
a quack.
An honourable mention to aardvark, a very important word in the English language,
animal, right?
but not in any other language. It comes from Afrikaans, which takes the word from Dutch, and this is an aardvark.
Yeah, an animal.
Why is it so important? Can't you see it? Can't you see it? Yes, that's right. It's the first word in the dictionary and a favourite word for plumbers and builders and other tradespeople who name their company Aardvark Limited so that they appear at the top of the alphabetical list. Because people can't be bothered to look down the list, and so they choose the first one.
That's
Aardvark
smart.
plumbers, that'll do. Should we check some others? No, we haven't got time. There's a leak in the kitchen. It's getting flooded.
There you go. Aardvark
So
got it.
let us know in the comments if I've left out any important words of Dutch origin, and tell me what else you'd like me to cover in this series of history of the English language. I'm going to eat my cookies and scones now, so stay mellow and tot de volgende keer.
All the Dutch words
Stay
are said
mellow.
correctly in this video, read by Robin Eisinger. Many
So stay mellow. Great video about how the Dutch changed the English language. So many Dutch words that I would have never known were attributed to the English language from the Dutch. So shout out to the Dutch because I used a lot of those. But that's all we got. If you guys enjoyed, let me know how you feel in the comment section. Also, don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the next one. I'll see y'all next time.